Genesis chapter 22. And in Genesis 22, we saw the sacrifice of Isaac, and we talked about how all of that is pointing forward to and is fulfilled in the person and work of our Lord Jesus Christ. And before we go on to the next little section, I just wanted to check and see if there were any follow-up questions to the sacrifice of Isaac. And I see Mark's coming around with the basket we're collecting for our mission of the month, which is the Women's Care Center.
Can you hear me now? Oh, there we go. All right. It's amazing how batteries work, isn't it? All right. So Mark's coming around the basket for the Women's Care Center. It's just a half a mile to the east of here. They help women choose life in all sorts of circumstances, and so that's our mission of the month for the month of March. Any questions on Genesis 22's sacrifice of Isaac? Okay. Then I'm going to read the last little section of Genesis 22, which is going to be important information for what is eventually coming. Specifically, we're going to be looking forward to the marriage of Isaac. And that's what this last little section is here to help us see and prepare for, as he's going to prepare to look for a wife. So Genesis 22, beginning at verse 20. After these things, after the sacrifice of Isaac, after his return to Beersheba, it was told to Abraham, "Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Rumah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah." All right. So there you go. If anyone's looking for children's names, Uz and Buz are biblical and on the table. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Now, what's really important about this particular section is that we have, make sure I say the right names here, Bethuel, who fathers Rebekah. And Rebekah is going to be the one who is going to be chosen to be the wife of Isaac. And this family is still back in Haran. They did not come along with Abraham into the land that would be promised to be given to his descendants. They remained behind in Haran. And so we're going to see, not in the next chapter, but a little after that, Abraham is going to send a messenger back to Haran, and the messenger is going to come back with Rebekah to marry Isaac. Okay? That's why this little section is important. Now we do see here again the issue of concubinage, and Vicar talked about this in his sermon this morning as well, which is great. We do see concubinage here again, but remember, this is not according to God's design. It's just something that happens in a fallen and sinful world. And I was doing research for something else and had seen, if you wonder when concubinage became illegal in the Western Christian world, it is back in 321. In the Codex Justinianus, the law of Justinian, in the 500s, he gathered together all of the Roman laws that had come down to him, and he put them together into one book, the Codex of Justinian. And in there it lists that in 321, under the consulship of Constantine the Great and his son, concubinage was made illegal. You see that take place all the way back then. And so for the last 1700 years, what year are we in? 1700 years, concubinage has been illegal, and it was made illegal then by the first Christian emperor, who he and his son are the ones that made it illegal. Yes, Clint. When did Constantine become a Christian? And suddenly, Bible class was taken over, and we didn't get to the topic on hand. Yeah, so there's no good way to know. And unfortunately, that's the way it is with history oftentimes. Constantine traditionally became a Christian shortly before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. So he becomes emperor in 306, and at that time there's actually 4 emperors. This is under the reforms of the Emperor Diocletian, and it was an attempt to curb the problems that had been going on during the 200s in the Roman Empire. And the problem was this: when you became emperor, you paid your troops a ton of money. And the troops learned that every time there was a new emperor, they got a ton of money. So what did they decide to do? We'll make Mark the emperor, and once the check clears the bank, off with his head, and then we'll make Clint the emperor, and once the bank has cleared the check, okay? And so you have a constant cycling through of emperors in the 200s, and the tide is finally stemmed to the point where in the 200s, the 250s to 275, you actually have 3 empires claiming to be the Roman Empire. You have France and England, called the Gaelic Empire, and then you have from the eastern side of Turkey all the way down into Egypt, that claimed to be a break-off empire as well. In the 260s, a guy named Claudius II, Claudius Gothicus, comes in, and he begins the process of reconquering and re-strengthening the Roman Empire. He dies from natural causes, and the Emperor Aurelian eventually becomes his successor. And I'm oversimplifying for the sake of time. Aurelian reconquers Egypt, Syria, all the way up to Turkey, and then he also goes over and reconquers Gaul and Britain, and he is putting things back in order before he is executed. And the reason that he's executed, how do I say this the right way? He's a German. He's not really German, but he's a German like we think of Germans. Everything has to be done the right way or else. And one of his slaves makes a mistake and is afraid that he's going to be caught and be in trouble for that. So the slave doctors some documents that say Aurelian's going to kill his subordinates, and those subordinates see the documents that are forged, so they kill Aurelian, and then the slave gets caught and found out that it's all a farce, so then they kill the slave as well. That leads to finally Diocletian building on the stability put in place by Aurelian and Claudius Gothicus. And he establishes what's known as the Tetrarchy. There are 4 emperors, 2 senior and 2 junior. And the idea is that the 2 senior ones are the main rulers, and they control the areas of the Roman Empire that have the biggest wealth and stability. And then the 2 junior emperors control lesser parts of the empire, but when the senior ones retire, the junior ones move up. And Diocletian says this is how we're going to do it. Constantius, the father of Constantine, was the junior emperor in England and controlling parts of France, okay, so at that time called Gaul. And he dies in 306, and Constantine the Great becomes the emperor. Now, he's the junior emperor. Diocletian, when Diocletian retires, what happens with the 4 emperors? They all want to be how many emperors? 1. So they all start fighting each other, and eventually, after many, many years, in the 324, Constantine comes to the top of the heap. Now, you have to know all that to answer the question, when did Constantine become a Christian? Because the answer is nobody knows. Nobody knows. Okay? Because the reason that Constantine comes to the top of the heap is because Constantine is a really smooth political actor. Okay? Really smooth political actor. He puts today's politicians to shame. Is he a Christian? I would say yes. When does he become one? We don't know. Because being a shrewd politician, he uses a lot of publicity that makes that answer very hard to understand. So, for example, 2 years before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine has a vision of a god who appears in the sky and tells him that you're going to rule and become the next emperor, the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. And guess who that god is? The Christian God, right? That's what we think. It's actually Mars. Okay? And so he uses that to establish his reign. And then a couple years later, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he has a vision from heaven, and the words spoken to him by God that in this sign you will conquer. And the second time, the God is who? The Christian God. Okay? So the thought is at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, he's already a Christian. He puts the Christian symbol on his shield. But even after that, he's still publishing coins and building buildings that indicate acceptance of pagan gods. Now, I would submit to you, he's a Christian at that point, but he also knows that Christianity is a small minority and that he can't just push it from the top down and expect the entire empire to suddenly become Christian. It doesn't work that way. And you know this because you know your catechism. What is it that makes people Christian? A Christian ruler? No. God's word preached and taught in its truth and purity, and the reception of the sacraments. So, I would submit to you, we know for sure that Constantine is a Christian in 325 when he calls the Council of Nicaea. I would submit to you he's a Christian long before that, but that publicly he's putting on a good face so that he can keep the empire together, because they've been struggling with that for the last 100 years. And he knows that it's going to take some time for the whole empire to come on board. And slowly, it starts to come on board. Now, there's also the question, when Constantine dies, is he a Christian or is he a semi-Arian? Right? Which makes it even more complicated. His son, Constantius II, for sure, is a semi-Arian. His other son, Constans, he was very creative, just like Buzz and Uz. He also had a daughter. Guess what her name was? Yeah, that's her, Connie, yeah, okay. His one son, Constans, is a Nicene Christian, His other son, Constantius II, is a semi-Arian Christian. Guess which one dies early and the other one becomes the sole ruler? The Arian ruler is the one who ends up taking over the whole empire out of his sons. So it's a really, really complicated question because the politics hide the truth. And the one thing you can never do in history is to look back, particularly 2,000 years, and see into Constantine's heart and mind and know when he became a Christian. We can't do that. I think he was a Christian in 321 when he outlawed concubinage, but I cannot tell you that for certainty, and in fact no one alive today can. Because the only one who can, Constantine himself, died in 336. Okay? And even after he dies, like I told you, his Arian son takes over the empire, and the empire is Arian. And then after that son dies, you have Julian the apostate, who tries to re-establish paganism. So we talked 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, he's the one who tried to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, why? To re-establish pagan worship. Okay, and he dies, and that's Valens and Valentinian become the emperors when he dies. And it's then that we start to have actually Christian rulers. And that's much, much later in the late 380s, early 390s. So it's a really complicated thing. I probably just made a big mess of it all. Did I answer your question? I'm glad you thought it was eloquent. Yeah, so, yeah, I would be inclined to agree with you, but let me play the devil's advocate the way that it is spoken about by people today. Because there's a big debate in the academic world about why Constantine outlawed concubinage. Was it because he was a Christian? Or, practically speaking, was it for a different reason? And the reason that the secularists put forward is that if I am a Roman, I'm allowed one wife by Roman law, but I can have concubines. And having the concubines means that some of the concubines will inevitably bear children. And then when I die, who gets my stuff? The thought is that at the time Constantine outlawed concubinage, the courts were overwhelmed with cases trying to decide who gets the stuff, who's a legitimate heir, and who's not. And you see that also in the scriptures when David is dying, right? Okay, how does Solomon become king? His mom goes to Nathan, and they do some manipulating behind the scenes so that David declares Solomon king, while at the same time his other brother is already celebrating becoming the king. How does this happen? This is the same problem when you have too many wives. It causes big practical problems that are very, very difficult to solve. And if it sounds crazy, think about our modern day. Okay? We don't have legal concubinage, but we have practical concubinage with extramarital sex. Right? So I think I might have quoted this in a sermon within the last couple months. But I recall about 10 years ago a news article about a man working for minimum wage at Walmart who had 21 children with 19 different women and 3 more on the way. And he was in the news because all of these women were suing him for back child support. And can a man working for minimum wage pay child support to 19 different women for 21 children? So then some judge has to spend a lot of time, and with that, when they're judges, comes money, to try and solve how all these children can be supported by their father, who is only thinking about one thing, and that's not taking care of his children. You see how that causes problems? Okay, so we have the functional problems of that right now. And that's something that we have to solve. Constantine tried to solve it by making concubinage illegal. And just to be completely clear, the law in the Codex Justinian doesn't make concubinage in all cases illegal. It just says that if you have a wife, you may not also have a concubine. Okay, and it's important to see that because 100 years later, what famous guy had a concubine? Anybody know? Saint Augustine. Okay, he was able to have a concubine because he did not have a wife. So, is the law evidence of Constantine's Christianity? I don't think that you can say that 100% certain. I think there's other things that indicate he was a Christian before that time. We cannot see into his mind, and we do have the evidence that he was a very smooth political operator his entire life. I do think that he was a real Christian. I do think we'll see him in heaven. And I told some of our kids here at church, mullets are coming back. Okay, Constantine and his family all had mullets. Okay, you can see that in their statues. So we'll see him and his mullet in heaven. Things to look forward to. He also was smart enough to let the word do its work and to rule in such a way that he was able to bring along the entire empire and let Christianity grow the way that it's supposed to grow. So, too complicated to answer your very simple question. So I don't know if I, again, waxed eloquently or not. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. Okay. All right. Genesis 20. Any questions? We see Rebecca mentioned, and she's going to become important in a little while. Yeah. Yeah. Are you making plans here? No, just teasing. Yeah. What's your legal responsibility to a concubine? we're trying to understand it in our modern context, and it's very difficult to do that because the truth is that a lot of concubines actually were your slaves. Okay, so there was slavery in the Roman Empire. And so a concubine might be your slave. It might not be also. It might be a freed, I'm going to say that the term is called freedman, right? But it'd be a freed woman, perhaps. But even in that case, she would owe you. How many people have seen the movie The Godfather? Okay. Want to learn how to be a pastor? Go watch The Godfather. No, I'm just teasing. In The Godfather, the head of the mob does a favor for someone, and then that person is responsible to always be ready to perform a favor back. That's what freedmen were too. You could free so many slaves per year, and you could free so many slaves when you died. But when you freed that slave, they owed you for the rest of their life. And they had to be constantly ready to pay you back for freeing them. And so oftentimes concubines would fall into that tier or the slavery tier. And in society then they're seen as a second-rate or third-rate type of person. You do oftentimes love your concubine and thereby try to take care of them and help them, but the law of the land applied differently to those people as well. There's a new book, I just finished reading it last week, by Guy de la Bedouire, who's a British historian, expert in Roman history, called Populus. It goes into the everyday life of what it was like to live in the Roman Empire. And if you want to know more about that, read that book. And that can kind of help you get the idea of the different tiers in society. When you die, your love and care for your concubine disappears, because if your wife is acting as your heir in a certain sense, she doesn't like your concubine. If your son is acting as your heir, he's going to get his own, and that changes the whole dynamic. So it's very complicated and difficult for us to think through and understand today. All right. We can use that as a transition to chapter 23. Because in chapter 23, Sarah is going to die. See how I changed the topic when my wife came in the room? Okay. Sarah is going to die. And that's what chapter 23 is all about. So I'm just going to read the whole chapter here. We're going to try and cover it fairly quickly. Okay? Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land, and he said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat for me Ephron the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For the full price let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in at the gate of his city. No, my lord, hear me. I will give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people I give it to you. Bury your dead." Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, "But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there." Ephron answered Abraham, "My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron and Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, throughout its whole area, was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah east of Mamre, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for a burying place by the Hittites. All right, now if you remember, Abraham was living over here in Beersheba. This is after the sacrifice of Isaac. It tells us that's where he went back. And it almost makes it sound like Sarah maybe is up here somewhere near Machpelah, near Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron today, and that she dies while she's up there. So Abraham comes up to where she died, and what you see in this section here is the ancient process of negotiating a deal. Okay? At this time, there was not money like we think of money. There were no coins yet. Coins wouldn't be invented for hundreds and hundreds of more years. Okay? We're talking about negotiating the purchase of a piece of land by weight of silver. Okay? And so that's all this back and forth. This is how business was transacted at the time. Okay? And if you went to the grocery store, which they didn't have back then, you would do this every time you bought anything. Okay? Rather than the store just saying, this is how much it costs, they would say, oh, probably going to have to give me 50 shekels of silver. And you might come in and say, well, what about 25? And they, that whole negotiating thing, that's what's happening here. That's what you see taking place. To buy the only property, land-wise, that Abraham will ever own in his entire life. And what does he buy this property for? To bury his wife. The only property that he actually owns in this world is the one where he's going to lay his wife to rest, where he's going to be laid to rest. And actually, Isaac and Jacob will all be buried there with their wives, except for Rebekah is going to be buried in Jerusalem, which is further north, just south of Jerusalem. Okay? The patriarchs will all be buried in this cave. And if you recall, during the Exodus, they took the body of Joseph up with them, and they buried that in this cave. Okay? So this property, the only property that the family owns, becomes the family tomb. I think there's a lot we could think about with that in our own life. Maybe we'll have to pick up on that next week as we start. The spot still exists. Oh. Did it show up on that one? Gone? Okay. Well, there you go. Just filled the whole program. Let's see if I can get that. been real fishy, this air parrot thing lately. Not wanting to work. Good. Okay, well, you're in the front. That'll teach you. You've got it printed off in front of you. You've got this building, which is, I think, like on the second slide. It's like a big square thing, and it's got two towers coming up out of it. Okay? This is an enclosure that was built by Herod the Great around the site of the cave of Machpelah. That building is then 2030-ish, 2040 or 50 years old. And it was built by King Herod and has remained as a site since that time. And before that, this was well known that this is the cave of Machpelah. Okay? And so you see, looks kind of like pillars in the wall. That's called pilasters. You see those there. This is also then helping us understand what the temple in the time of Herod looked like as well, because he used the same building construction techniques. And so there's places where Josephus tells us that the temple had pilasters, and you can guess that it looked like this wall. Okay? Now, inside of there today is the cave, but there's a problem that's different today than it was 2,000 years ago, and that's that both Islam and Judaism, they both believe the truth that Abraham is buried there, but they both believe that thereby it is their own holy site. And so half of this building is a Jewish synagogue, if you will, I'm using the term loosely, and the other half is a mosque. And it's very tenuous relations between the two groups, but in there is a locked door that goes down into the cave, and nobody's allowed to go down there from either side because they both hate each other. But there is tradition that 150 years ago, a couple people did go down, and that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and the family, their bodies and their bones are still down in the cave. Now, can we trust that 100%? No, but that's the tradition, and that's why everybody's fighting over this site so greatly. And then you see the next picture, that's the inside of it, and so you can kind of see, I think this is on the mosque side, this particular picture. And so it gives you an idea of what it looks like inside this enclosure. This site where Sarah is buried is still in existence, and it is historically verifiable at least to 2,100 years ago, just to round up the time of Herod the Great. So you think about that, that's pretty good foundation. Okay? All right. Who holds the key? The two sides each have their half. And every once in a while, they get mad at each other, and there's kind of a little riot in there. So there's two doors, two keys, big wall in between, but it's, yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah. I have to check. I have to check because I don't know where the line is. It almost looks to me from the map picture as if it is in the West Bank. And the way you can tell is usually in the Israeli part of it, the land is green because they irrigate. And in the Arab part, it's brown because they don't. Okay? But without looking at the map for sure, that's just an educated guess. Okay, we're out of time. We'll pick up with this next week and hear about the death of Sarah a little bit more, and then we'll meet Rebekah, the wife for Isaac. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Amen.